Throughout human history, books have served as profound instruments for the dissemination of ideas, challenging entrenched paradigms, inciting revolutions, and shaping the fabric of societies. While countless literary and philosophical works have left an indelible mark, a select few have fundamentally transformed the trajectory of human thought and civilization. These texts, pioneering in their content and revolutionary in their ideas, transcend temporal boundaries to influence successive generations. This essay critically examines 10 such books, excluding religious texts, that have irrevocably altered the world. In curating this selection, criteria included the work's historical and cultural significance, the originality of its ideas, the breadth of its influence, and its enduring legacy. Each entry elucidates how the written word possesses the unique capacity to engender transformation, whether by advancing scientific knowledge, redefining societal norms, or deepening humanity's understanding of itself. 1. The Republic by Plato. Plato's The Republic is one of the most influential works in Western philosophy. Written around 380 BC, it is a Socratic dialogue exploring the nature of justice, the ideal state, and the human soul. The dialogue takes place between Socrates and various other characters, primarily Glaucon and Adimantus, as they discuss the meaning of justice, the structure of an ideal society, and the relationship between the individual and the state. The core of the Republic is the concept of a just society, which Plato envisions as a hierarchical structure where each individual plays a role that best suits their abilities. The work is divided into 10 books, addressing various philosophical questions. Plato uses his character Socrates to guide the conversation, questioning assumptions and leading the participants toward deeper insights about morality, politics, and the human condition. The Republic lays the foundation for Western political philosophy by introducing several key ideas about governance, morality, and society. Plato's vision of the ideal state is structured into 3 classes: the rulers, the auxiliaries, soldiers, and the producers, farmers, artisans, etc. The ruling class, according to Plato, should consist of philosopher kings, wise, virtuous rulers who understand the forms, particularly the form of the good, and are therefore best suited to govern. The book introduces the theory of the tripartite soul, in which Plato argues that the human soul consists of 3 parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Just as society is structured into 3 classes, the soul is similarly divided, with reason ruling over spirit and appetite. Justice, for Plato, is when each part of the soul and society performs its role in harmony. Plato's ideal city-state has influenced numerous political theories throughout history. His notion of the philosopher king has been echoed by thinkers such as Thomas More, who proposed a similar vision in Utopia, and even by leaders in various historical contexts who have sought to rule with wisdom and virtue. His exploration of justice and equality also contributed to the development of later democratic and authoritarian political thought. Plato's ideas on governance and the role of philosophy and politics have had a lasting impact on the development of Western political theory. His work laid the groundwork for later thinkers like Aristotle, who would critique and build upon Plato's ideas, as well as modern political philosophers such as John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose works further explore the nature of government and the rights of individuals. The Republic has remained a cornerstone of Western philosophy, inspiring countless generations of thinkers and leaders. Plato's ideas about justice, the nature of the ideal state, and the role of the philosopher in society continue to resonate in modern political discourse. The concept of philosopher kings has inspired debates about the role of intellectuals and experts in governance, particularly in times of crisis. Plato's emphasis on education and the cultivation of wisdom has influenced the development of educational systems and the role of philosophy in the development of moral and ethical frameworks. Plato's influence extends beyond political thought, however. His ideas about the soul and human nature have shaped Western psychology, particularly in the development of theories about human behavior, morality, and personal fulfillment. The division of the soul into reason, spirit, and appetite can be seen in later psychological theories, particularly in Freud's model of the id, ego, and superego. In literature, Plato's works have had a profound impact on writers and thinkers throughout history. His allegory of the cave, for example, has been interpreted as a metaphor for enlightenment, the search for truth, and the human condition. This allegory has influenced a wide range of thinkers, from medieval scholars to existentialists such as Jean-Paul Sartre, who grappled with the search for meaning and the nature of human freedom. Furthermore, Plato's work has played a critical role in shaping Western notions of ethics, justice, and morality. His focus on the ideal of a just society has influenced contemporary debates on human rights, equality, and the role of government in ensuring social welfare. The ethical questions raised by the Republic, about the nature of justice, the relationship between the individual and society, and the pursuit of the good life, continue to shape philosophical discussions to this day. The Republic by Plato has not only shaped the course of philosophy and political theory but has also provided a framework for thinking about justice, governance, and human nature. Its legacy endures in modern political systems, educational frameworks, and ethical discussions. Plato's work continues to be a touchstone for anyone seeking to understand the role of philosophy in society, and the nature of a just and harmonious world. 2. On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, is Charles Darwin's groundbreaking work that introduced the theory of evolution by natural selection. This book revolutionized the field of biology and transformed our understanding of life on Earth. Darwin meticulously presents evidence from various branches of science: geology, paleontology, biogeography, and embryology, to argue that species are not fixed but evolve over time through a process of natural selection. The book is structured to outline the principles of evolution and how natural selection operates within species. Darwin begins with an analysis of variation in nature, highlighting the differences between individuals within a species. He explains how organisms with advantageous traits are more likely to survive and reproduce, passing these traits on to their offspring. Over long periods, this process leads to the gradual accumulation of changes in a species, eventually resulting in the emergence of new species. Darwin's theory challenged the prevailing belief in the fixity of species, which had been rooted in religious doctrine and the works of earlier naturalists. His work also introduced the concept of descent with modification, the idea that all life forms are related and have descended from common ancestors. The publication of On the Origin of Species marked a scientific revolution, shifting the focus of biology from static classification systems to a dynamic understanding of life. Darwin's theory of natural selection provided a unifying framework for understanding the diversity of life on Earth and how species adapt to their environments. Before Darwin, the dominant view in science was that species were created in their present forms by a divine power, as suggested by the theological framework of the time. The theory of evolution, however, proposed that species evolved over time, driven by natural forces rather than divine intervention. This radically new approach contradicted not only the religious dogma of the era but also the scientific theories of the time. One of the most important contributions of On the Origin of Species is its evidence-based approach. Darwin compiled an enormous amount of evidence from his travels, particularly during his voyage on HMS Beagle, where he observed the natural world and collected specimens from different regions of the world. He also examined fossil records, the geographical distribution of species, and the evidence of artificial selection, where humans had deliberately bred animals and plants for desirable traits. Darwin's theory of natural selection also incorporated the idea of survival of the fittest, which referred to the differential survival and reproduction of organisms based on their ability to adapt to their environment. The concept of adaptation became central to evolutionary biology, and Darwin's work opened the door for future research into the genetic mechanisms behind evolutionary change. The publication of On the Origin of Species was met with widespread controversy, particularly among religious groups and those who adhered to creationist views. Darwin's theory directly challenged the biblical narrative of creation, which held that God created all species in their present form. The idea that humans shared common ancestors with animals was seen as especially controversial and undermined traditional views of human superiority. Despite the backlash, Darwin's ideas gained support from the scientific community, particularly after the development of genetics in the early 20th century. The discovery of the mechanism of inheritance by Gregor Mendel, and the subsequent synthesis of Darwin's theory with Mendelian genetics in the modern synthesis of evolutionary biology, solidified the theory of evolution as the cornerstone of biological science. The social implications of On the Origin of Species were also significant. Darwin's theory of evolution had far-reaching consequences beyond biology, influencing philosophy, psychology, and even social theory. In particular, the idea of survival of the fittest was co-opted by social Darwinists, who applied the concept of natural selection to justify social and economic inequalities. This misapplication of Darwin's ideas fueled ideologies such as laissez-faire capitalism and imperialism, which sought to justify the exploitation of weaker nations and social classes. On the other hand, Darwin's work also played a role in the development of progressive social movements. The recognition that all species are interconnected and share common ancestors has had a lasting impact on environmentalism, conservation, and the understanding of biodiversity. The idea that species are not fixed, but rather constantly changing and adapting, also contributed to the development of ideas about the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of preserving ecosystems. The legacy of On the Origin of Species is profound and far-reaching. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has become the central unifying theory of biology, explaining the diversity of life and the processes by which organisms evolve and adapt. The theory has been confirmed and expanded upon through a wide range of scientific disciplines, including genetics, molecular biology, paleontology, and anthropology. Darwin's work laid the foundation for the field of evolutionary biology, and his theory of natural selection remains the key concept in understanding the development of life on Earth. The modern understanding of genetics, which traces the inheritance of traits from one generation to the next, has provided the mechanism for evolution, confirming many of Darwin's predictions and insights. The discovery of DNA and the subsequent mapping of the human genome has further solidified the theory of evolution, showing how genetic variation contributes to the process of natural selection. In addition to its scientific legacy, Darwin's work has had a profound influence on philosophy, ethics, and the social sciences. The recognition that humans are part of the natural world, rather than separate from it, has led to a more holistic view of human beings and our place in the world. It has contributed to a shift away from anthropocentrism, the belief that humans are the central focus of existence, and toward an ecocentric perspective that values the interconnectedness of all living organisms. The impact of On the Origin of Species is also evident in popular culture. Darwin's theory of evolution has become part of the collective consciousness, influencing everything from literature and film to art and music. The concept of evolution is now widely accepted and serves as a basis for discussions about human origins, the future of life on Earth, and our responsibility to preserve the natural world. On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin fundamentally transformed our understanding of life, evolution, and the natural world. It provided a scientific framework for understanding how species change over time and adapt to their environments, and its legacy continues to shape the fields of biology, philosophy, and social theory. Darwin's work remains one of the most important and enduring contributions to scientific thought, and has had a profound impact on how we understand ourselves and the world around us. 3. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. First published in 1848, the Communist Manifesto is one of the most influential political documents in history. Written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the manifesto was a call to arms for the working class to overthrow the capitalist systems in which they were oppressed and to replace them with a system based on collective ownership of the means of production. In less than 50 pages, it encapsulates the theory of historical materialism, the class struggle, and the role of the proletariat, working class, in revolutionary change. The manifesto is divided into 4 sections. The first outlines the historical development of society through different stages: feudalism, capitalism, and the eventual rise of socialism. The second section critiques the contemporary political landscape and the various responses to capitalism. The third part presents the immediate aims of the Communist League, an organization of workers dedicated to bringing about social change. The final section is a stirring call for revolution, urging workers of the world to unite and overthrow the capitalist class. Though it was written in a specific historical and political context, the manifesto transcends its immediate time and place, continuing to serve as a foundational document for socialist and communist movements worldwide. The Communist Manifesto introduced several revolutionary ideas that reshaped political thought and sparked global movements. One of the manifesto's key themes is the theory of historical materialism, which posits that history is shaped by the economic systems in place at any given time. Marx and Engels argue that material conditions, the ways in which societies produce and distribute goods, ultimately determine social relations, political structures, and cultural ideas. In capitalist societies, these conditions create an inherent conflict between the bourgeoisie, owners of capital, and the proletariat, the working class. Marx and Engels also present the idea of class struggle as the driving force behind historical change. In their view, every society has been marked by struggles between different classes, and in capitalism, this struggle manifests in the exploitation of workers by capitalists. The proletariat, according to Marx, is alienated from the products of its labor, as it does not own the means of production and has no control over the outcomes of its work. This alienation, Marx argues, leads to the eventual breakdown of the capitalist system, as the working class will rise up against their oppressors in a revolutionary struggle. One of the most notable aspects of the Communist Manifesto is its call for international revolution. Marx and Engels famously write, "Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains." This line encapsulates the manifesto's goal of international solidarity among workers, regardless of nationality, in the fight against global capitalism. The manifesto sees the overthrow of capitalism not as a single national event but as a worldwide movement to create a classless society. The impact of the Communist Manifesto was immediate and profound. It quickly became a rallying cry for revolutionary movements, particularly among the working class and socialist groups. Its ideas helped to shape the intellectual and political landscape of the 19th and 20th centuries, influencing movements such as the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the rise of communist governments in China, Cuba, and other countries. In the years following its publication, the manifesto became an essential text for socialist and communist parties worldwide. Its critique of capitalist exploitation and its call for the abolition of private property and the establishment of a classless society resonated with workers and intellectuals alike, particularly during periods of social and economic unrest. The 1848 revolutions across Europe, the Russian Revolution, and the rise of communist regimes in the 20th century were all directly influenced by the ideas laid out in the Communist Manifesto. The legacy of the Communist Manifesto is vast and enduring. Its influence is evident in the development of socialist and communist thought throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The manifesto provided the intellectual foundation for the rise of the Soviet Union, the establishment of Maoist China, and the spread of communist ideology across the globe. Marx and Engels' ideas continued to shape political discourse and movements. Socialism, in its various forms, remains a central part of political debates, particularly around issues such as wealth inequality, labor rights, and the role of government in regulating the economy. The Communist Manifesto's critiques of capitalism, its focus on class struggle, exploitation, and alienation, remain relevant in contemporary discussions about globalization, income inequality, and the power of multinational corporations. In the post-World War II period, many countries in Europe and Latin America saw the rise of socialist and communist governments, inspired by the manifesto's call for revolution. The most significant example of this was the Russian Revolution of 1917, which led to the establishment of the Soviet Union under Lenin and later Stalin. The principles of Marxist-Leninist thought shaped Soviet policy, influencing everything from economic planning to the repression of political dissent. Similarly, the rise of communist governments in China, Cuba, and other parts of the world was deeply influenced by the ideas in the Communist Manifesto. However, the legacy of the Communist Manifesto is not without controversy. The application of Marxist principles in the 20th century often led to authoritarian regimes that contradicted the manifesto's call for a stateless, classless society. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, became a symbol of how Marxist ideas could be distorted into totalitarian rule, with widespread purges, forced collectivization, and state control over all aspects of life. Similarly, the Chinese Communist Party, under Mao Zedong, implemented policies that led to mass famine, political persecution, and the Cultural Revolution. Despite these challenges, the ideas put forward in the Communist Manifesto continue to resonate with critics of capitalism. In the 21st century, growing concerns about economic inequality, the power of corporations, and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few have led to renewed interest in socialist and Marxist ideas. Movements such as Occupy Wall Street, as well as the rise of left-wing political parties in various countries, can trace their intellectual roots to the manifesto's critique of capitalism and its call for systemic change. The manifesto's vision of a society in which the means of production are collectively owned and controlled remains a powerful ideal for many on the political left. The question of how to achieve a more just and equitable society is as relevant today as it was in 1848. And the Communist Manifesto continues to serve as a blueprint for those seeking to challenge economic inequality and social injustice. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels is one of the most influential political works ever written. Its critique of capitalism, its call for revolutionary change, and its vision of a classless society have shaped political movements and ideologies for over a century. Although the implementation of its ideas in the 20th century often resulted in authoritarian regimes, the manifesto's core critique of capitalism and its call for solidarity among workers continue to resonate in modern political debates. The manifesto's legacy endures, particularly in contemporary discussions about wealth inequality, labor rights, and the power of multinational corporations. Whether as a source of inspiration or as a cautionary tale, the Communist Manifesto remains a cornerstone of political thought, offering a bold vision for a more equitable and just world. 4. The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Published in 1776, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, commonly known as The Wealth of Nations, is considered the foundational work of modern economics. Written by Scottish philosopher and economist Adam Smith, the book lays the groundwork for classical economics and offers a detailed exploration of how nations can achieve prosperity. The work examines the nature of wealth, the role of labor, capital, and markets, and the ways in which government policies impact economic systems. Smith's central thesis is that individuals pursuing their own self-interest in a free market economy can lead to greater prosperity for all. He argues that the invisible hand of the market, a concept he introduced in this book, guides individuals to act in ways that, unintentionally, benefit society as a whole. Through voluntary exchanges and competition, goods and services are allocated efficiently, and wealth is created. The book is divided into 5 main sections: the division of labor, the nature of wealth, the role of capital, the functioning of markets, and the role of government in economics. Smith critiques mercantilism, the dominant economic theory of his time, which emphasized state control of trade and the accumulation of precious metals as the primary means of wealth. Instead, he champions free trade, minimal government intervention, and the idea that economic prosperity depends on the productivity of labor and the efficient allocation of resources. One of Smith's most important contributions to economic thought is the concept of the division of labor. In the first section of The Wealth of Nations, he explains how dividing the production process into specialized tasks allows workers to become more efficient and productive. For example, in a pin factory, if each worker is assigned a specific task, such as drawing out the wire, cutting the wire into pins, or sharpening the ends, the factory can produce far more pins in the same amount of time than if each worker tried to make an entire pin from start to finish. The division of labor leads to increased productivity, reduced costs, and ultimately, greater wealth for society. Smith also emphasizes the importance of capital accumulation. He explains that savings and investment are necessary for economic growth. Capital, in the form of tools, machinery, and infrastructure, enables workers to produce more efficiently and in greater quantities. The accumulation of capital, therefore, allows nations to increase their wealth by producing more goods and services, which can be exchanged for other resources or sold in the market. Another significant contribution of the wealth of nations is Smith's analysis of the functioning of markets and the role of competition in regulating prices. Smith introduces the idea of the invisible hand to describe how self-interested individuals, seeking to maximize their own benefit, unintentionally promote the public good. In a competitive market, firms will strive to offer better products at lower prices in order to attract customers. This process of competition leads to the efficient allocation of resources and the creation of wealth. The invisible hand, according to Smith, ensures that supply meets demand and that resources are used in the most productive way possible. Smith also discusses the importance of free trade and the dangers of protectionism. He critiques mercantilism, which held that national wealth was best measured by the accumulation of precious metals, such as gold and silver, through trade surpluses. Instead, Smith argues that wealth is created by the production of goods and services, not by hoarding precious metals. Free trade, he argues, allows countries to specialize in the production of goods they can produce most efficiently, leading to lower prices, increased competition, and more goods available to consumers. The impact of the wealth of nations on economic and political thought has been immense. Smith's ideas laid the intellectual foundation for the development of capitalism, particularly the form of market-driven economies that emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries. His advocacy for free markets and minimal government intervention in the economy has influenced the policies of governments around the world, particularly in the development of liberal capitalist economies. The idea that individuals acting in their own self-interest can unintentionally promote the public good became central to capitalist ideologies, particularly in the development of laissez-faire economics. Smith's work provided the theoretical justification for policies that emphasized limited government intervention in the economy, and his ideas became the cornerstone of classical economics. Smith's critique of mercantilism also had a profound effect on global trade policies. His support for free trade and his belief in the benefits of specialization influenced the development of international trade agreements and the global trading system. In the 19th century, countries such as Great Britain adopted free trade policies, which contributed to the expansion of international commerce and the growth of the global economy. The social implications of the wealth of nations are also significant. Smith's ideas about the division of labor and specialization have had lasting effects on the organization of work in capitalist economies. In industrialized societies, production is often divided into highly specialized tasks, with workers focusing on specific aspects of the production process. This has led to the growth of industries, the expansion of factory-based production, and the rise of mass consumer markets. At the same time, Smith's ideas also had a profound impact on labor relations and class structures. The division of labor, while leading to increased productivity and wealth, also created a division between those who owned capital, the bourgeoisie, and those who sold their labor, the proletariat. Smith's work laid the groundwork for later critiques of capitalism, particularly from Marxist thinkers who argued that capitalism inherently exploits workers and leads to inequality. Smith's ideas also sparked debates about the role of government in the economy. While Smith advocated for minimal government intervention, he acknowledged that government had important roles to play in protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, and providing public goods such as defense, infrastructure, and education. These ideas would later influence the development of modern welfare states and the ongoing debate about the proper role of government in regulating markets. The Wealth of Nations is considered one of the most important books in the history of economic thought. Its ideas continue to shape the study of economics and the functioning of capitalist economies. Smith's work laid the foundation for classical economics, which dominated economic thought in the 19th century and provided the theoretical basis for the expansion of capitalist economies around the world. The book has influenced the development of modern economic theories, including neoclassical economics, which builds on Smith's ideas about the efficiency of markets, the role of competition, and the importance of capital accumulation. Smith's concept of the invisible hand has become a central idea in free market economics, and is often invoked to justify laissez-faire policies and limited government intervention in the economy. In addition to its influence on economic thought, The Wealth of Nations also had a lasting impact on political philosophy. Smith's ideas about the role of government in society and the economy laid the groundwork for the development of liberal political theory, which emphasizes individual rights, limited government, and free markets. His work provided the intellectual foundation for the rise of capitalism as the dominant economic system in the modern world. The book's legacy extends beyond economics into popular culture and politics. Smith's critique of mercantilism and his advocacy for free trade have shaped global trade policies, and his ideas about economic growth and development continue to inform debates about poverty, inequality, and globalization. The book's influence can be seen in the economic policies of nations around the world, particularly in capitalist economies that prioritize market competition and individual entrepreneurship. The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith is a seminal work in the history of economic thought. Its analysis of labor, capital, markets, and government intervention laid the foundation for classical economics and the rise of capitalist economies. Smith's ideas about the division of labor, free trade, and the invisible hand have had a profound impact on economic theory and policy, shaping the development of global capitalism. The legacy of The Wealth of Nations endures in contemporary discussions about the role of government in the economy, the functioning of markets, and the distribution of wealth. Smith's work remains a cornerstone of economic thought, offering insights into the nature of wealth, the dynamics of markets, and the principles that underlie modern capitalist economies. 5. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. Published in 1949, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir is a groundbreaking work of feminist philosophy and one of the most influential texts in the history of gender studies. The book is a profound analysis of the role of women in society, examining how women have been historically oppressed, marginalized, and relegated to a secondary status in relation to men. De Beauvoir's central thesis is encapsulated in her famous assertion that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman, highlighting how gender is a social construct rather than a biological inevitability. The book is divided into 2 volumes: Facts and Myths, and Lived Experience. In the first volume, de Beauvoir explores the historical, cultural, and biological factors that have contributed to women's subjugation. She critiques the ways in which society has constructed and perpetuated myths about femininity, motherhood, and women's place in the world. In the second volume, de Beauvoir examines the lived experiences of women in different stages of life, from childhood to old age, and analyzes how societal structures affect women's personal and sexual lives, as well as their social, political, and economic opportunities. The Second Sex is both a philosophical treatise and a sociological study. It draws on a wide range of sources, including literature, history, anthropology, and psychology, to explore the ways in which women have been conditioned to accept their inferior status. De Beauvoir's work is not just a critique of patriarchy but also a call for women's liberation, arguing that women must reject the roles assigned to them by society and reclaim their autonomy. One of de Beauvoir's most significant contributions to feminist thought is her examination of the ways in which womanhood has been constructed throughout history and culture. She argues that, historically, women have been defined as the other, in opposition to the male subject, who has been regarded as the norm. In her view, women have been reduced to an object, to be defined and controlled by men, rather than being allowed to define themselves as autonomous beings. De Beauvoir draws on Hegel's concept of the other, arguing that men have created a binary opposition between themselves, as the active, dominant force, and women, as the passive, subordinate force. This distinction has led to the creation of various myths about women, such as the idea that women are inherently weaker, more emotional, and more suited to domestic life. These myths have been perpetuated by religion, literature, philosophy, and science, all of which have portrayed women as inferior or secondary to men. For example, de Beauvoir critiques how religious texts, particularly Christianity, have historically depicted women as the source of sin and the reason for mankind's fall from grace. She examines how the concept of original sin has been used to justify the subjugation of women, portraying them as inherently flawed and in need of male guidance and protection. Similarly, de Beauvoir analyzes how literature, particularly the works of male writers, has often reinforced the idea of women as passive objects of desire or as mothers and wives, rather than as independent individuals. She explores how women in literature are frequently portrayed as one-dimensional characters whose worth is defined by their relationship to men, reinforcing the idea that women's value is determined by their ability to please or support men. In The Second Sex, de Beauvoir also critiques the way in which women have been biologically essentialized, with ideas about women's supposed nature being used to justify their inferior social and political status. She argues that the scientific and medical communities have historically perpetuated myths about women's physical and emotional characteristics, portraying them as biologically destined for motherhood and domesticity. By analyzing the historical and cultural forces that have shaped women's roles, de Beauvoir demonstrates that women's subordination is not a natural or biological fact, but rather a result of social conditioning. In the second volume of The Second Sex, de Beauvoir delves into the lived experiences of women, examining how their socialization impacts their sense of self and their roles in society. She explores how women internalize the messages of inferiority and submission that are conveyed to them throughout their lives, from childhood to adulthood. De Beauvoir argues that the socialization of girls and women begins at an early age, as they are taught to be passive, dependent, and nurturing. From the moment a girl is born, she is taught to embrace a feminine identity, one that is centered on passivity, domesticity, and subordination. This process of socialization reinforces the idea that women's primary role is to be a wife and mother, and that their worth is measured by their ability to fulfill these roles. In her discussion of women's sexual and romantic lives, de Beauvoir critiques the way in which women are often taught to define themselves through their relationships with men. She notes how women are socialized to view men as the ultimate source of validation and fulfillment, leading them to shape their identities around the desires and expectations of men. This creates a cycle in which women continually seek male approval and reinforcement, further entrenching their subordinate position in society. De Beauvoir also examines how women's roles as mothers and caregivers are used to justify their domestic confinement and exclusion from the public sphere. She critiques the idealization of motherhood, arguing that it has been used as a tool to keep women in the home, reinforcing their dependency on men. At the same time, she recognizes that many women find fulfillment in motherhood and caregiving, but she stresses that the societal pressure to embrace these roles should not be viewed as a natural or inevitable aspect of womanhood. Throughout The Second Sex, de Beauvoir highlights the ways in which women's internalization of their subordinate status prevents them from realizing their full potential as autonomous individuals. She calls for women to reject the roles imposed upon them by society and to assert their own identity, free from the constraints of traditional gender norms. The Second Sex is not just a critique of patriarchy, it is also a call for women's liberation. De Beauvoir argues that in order for women to achieve true freedom, they must reject the societal structures that have confined them to subordinate roles. This requires not only a change in the way women see themselves, but also a transformation of the social, political, and economic systems that perpetuate their oppression. De Beauvoir advocates for women's participation in the public sphere, including the workforce and politics, as a means of achieving equality. She argues that women should be free to pursue careers, education, and personal development on their own terms, without being confined to the roles of wife and mother. She also calls for the abolition of the traditional family structure, which she sees as a site of patriarchal domination. In her view, the nuclear family is an institution that reinforces gender inequality, as women are expected to fulfill the roles of caretaker and nurturer, while men are free to pursue their own ambitions. At the heart of de Beauvoir's vision of liberation is the idea that women must take control of their own lives and bodies. She advocates for sexual liberation, calling for women to embrace their sexuality and desire without shame or guilt. In doing so, she challenges traditional views of female sexuality, which have often been shaped by male-dominated religious and cultural norms. De Beauvoir's call for women's liberation extends beyond individual empowerment to encompass a collective struggle for social and political change. She recognizes that women's oppression is rooted in systemic structures of power and inequality, and she urges women to unite in solidarity to challenge these structures and create a more just and equitable society. The Second Sex is one of the most influential feminist texts of the 20th century, and continues to shape feminist thought today. De Beauvoir's critique of patriarchy, her exploration of gender as a social construct, and her call for women's liberation have had a lasting impact on feminist movements around the world. Her ideas about the social construction of gender have influenced subsequent feminist theories, particularly those associated with gender performativity, which challenge traditional notions of biological sex and gender roles. Scholars such as Judith Butler have built upon de Beauvoir's insights to argue that gender is not an innate characteristic, but rather a performance that is shaped by cultural norms and expectations. The book's impact is also evident in contemporary feminist activism, where de Beauvoir's ideas continue to inform debates around gender equality, sexual liberation, and the dismantling of patriarchal systems. Her work has inspired generations of women to challenge the social and cultural norms that have restricted their freedom and to fight for a world in which women can fully realize their potential. While The Second Sex has been widely praised for its intellectual rigor and its revolutionary ideas, it has also faced criticism, particularly for its focus on the experiences of bourgeois women. Some feminist scholars argue that de Beauvoir's analysis overlooks the intersectional nature of oppression, failing to account for how race, class, and colonialism intersect with gender in shaping women's experiences. Despite these critiques, The Second Sex remains a foundational text in feminist philosophy and continues to be a vital resource for those seeking to understand and challenge gender inequality. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir is a pioneering work of feminist philosophy that has had a profound impact on the way we understand gender, sexuality, and women's liberation. By analyzing the historical and cultural construction of womanhood, the internalization of oppression, and the socialization of women, de Beauvoir challenges the societal norms that have relegated women to secondary status and calls for a radical transformation of social, political, and economic structures. Her work continues to inspire feminist movements and remains a crucial text for understanding and challenging gender inequality. 6. The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Published in 1963, The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan is widely credited with sparking the second wave of feminism in the United States and challenging the traditional roles assigned to women in the post-World War II era. The book critiques the cultural ideal of femininity that was prevalent in the 1950s and 1960s, which glorified women's roles as wives and mothers, and called for a reevaluation of women's place in society beyond the domestic sphere. Friedan's primary focus is what she terms the problem that has no name, a sense of dissatisfaction and disillusionment that many American women felt despite having what were considered to be ideal lives: marriage, children, and a comfortable suburban home. According to Friedan, these women were encouraged to view their role as housewives and mothers as their sole purpose in life, leaving them with little sense of personal fulfillment or identity outside of their domestic duties. The book draws on extensive interviews, surveys, and research, as well as cultural and historical analysis, to argue that the feminine mystique, the cultural myth that a woman's true fulfillment lies in her role as wife and mother, has led to the repression of women's individuality and desires. Friedan's critique of this ideal was revolutionary, as it directly challenged the dominant cultural narrative of the time that women should find joy and purpose solely within the confines of the home. Through the feminine mystique, Friedan became one of the leading voices in the feminist movement, calling for women to recognize the limitations of the gender roles imposed upon them and to seek opportunities for education, work, and personal growth outside the home. The book laid the foundation for the feminist activism of the 1960s and 1970s, which advocated for legal and social changes to ensure women's equality in all areas of life. In The Feminine Mystique, Friedan argues that after World War II, American society placed a significant emphasis on women's roles as wives and mothers, particularly within the context of suburban life. The post-war era saw a rise in consumer culture and the expansion of suburban neighborhoods, and there was a widespread belief that the ideal woman was one who embraced domesticity, took care of her family, and created a comfortable home. Women were encouraged to devote themselves entirely to their husbands and children, with little regard for their own personal aspirations or desires. Friedan examines how this ideal of femininity was reinforced by media, advertising, and popular culture. Magazines, television shows, and films portrayed the suburban housewife as the epitome of fulfillment, reinforcing the notion that a woman's true purpose in life was to be a devoted wife and mother. This image of the happy housewife was not only pervasive but also highly idealized, creating an unrealistic and narrow standard for women to live up to. However, Friedan found that many women who conformed to this ideal of femininity were secretly dissatisfied with their lives. Despite having material comforts, stable marriages, and children, many women reported feeling unfulfilled, restless, and isolated. Friedan described this as the problem that has no name, the sense that something was missing in the lives of these women, but they couldn't articulate exactly what it was. The societal pressure to conform to the ideal of domestic bliss led many women to feel inadequate, or even ashamed for experiencing such feelings, as if they were ungrateful for the privileges and comforts their lives afforded them. Friedan's critique of this suburban ideal is one of the central themes of the feminine mystique. She argues that the pressure to live up to the feminine mystique not only stifled women's potential but also led to a kind of psychological repression. Women were encouraged to suppress their intellectual and creative aspirations and to focus solely on their roles as wives and mothers, which led to a sense of lost identity and a feeling of being trapped within a rigid set of expectations. Friedan's analysis of the psychological effects of the feminine mystique is a key part of her argument. She draws on interviews with housewives, surveys, and psychological research to show how the idealization of domesticity led to a widespread sense of dissatisfaction among women. These women, who were often well-educated and had opportunities for work and self-expression, felt unfulfilled and stifled by their roles as wives and mothers. Friedan delves into the concept of the problem that has no name, describing how women were socialized to believe that their personal worth was tied to their ability to create a perfect home and care for their families. Many women reported feeling that they had no purpose beyond these domestic duties, and as a result, they struggled with feelings of emptiness, frustration, and even depression. Friedan argues that the feminine mystique prevented women from pursuing meaningful careers, further education, or intellectual interests, causing them to feel that their lives lacked purpose beyond their familial responsibilities. Friedan also explores the ways in which the feminine mystique harmed women's relationships with one another. The focus on domesticity and motherhood often isolated women from each other, making them feel as though they were alone in their struggles. The myth of the perfect housewife created an environment in which women were reluctant to acknowledge their dissatisfaction or to support each other in pursuing their own dreams and ambitions. Friedan critiques the medical and psychological establishment, which largely ignored or dismissed the psychological struggles of women during this period. Instead of recognizing the social and cultural forces that were at play, many doctors and psychologists blamed women's dissatisfaction on their inherent psychological flaws or biological differences from men. Friedan critiques this approach, arguing that women's struggles were not the result of innate deficiencies but the consequence of living in a society that imposed narrow and restrictive gender roles. One of Friedan's key arguments in the feminine mystique is that education and work are essential for women's personal development and fulfillment. She challenges the notion that women's primary purpose is to be wives and mothers and argues that women should have the opportunity to pursue careers, education, and other interests that allow them to realize their full potential. Friedan criticizes the idea that women's education should be focused solely on preparing them for marriage and motherhood. She points out that many women in the post-war era were highly educated, but their education was often dismissed or underutilized once they married and became mothers. She advocates for greater opportunities for women in higher education and the workforce, arguing that these opportunities would not only benefit individual women but also society as a whole. Friedan's emphasis on the importance of work is particularly significant. She argues that women should not be confined to the home but should be encouraged to participate fully in the workforce. Work, according to Friedan, provides women with a sense of purpose, autonomy, and intellectual stimulation that domestic life alone cannot offer. She calls for policies that support women's participation in the workforce, such as access to professional opportunities, equal pay, and the availability of affordable childcare. In The Feminine Mystique, Friedan envisions a society where women have the freedom to choose their roles, whether as homemakers, professionals, or a combination of both, without the constraints of traditional gender expectations. She argues that this freedom will not only lead to greater personal fulfillment for women but also benefit society by allowing women to contribute to the economy, culture, and intellectual life. The Feminine Mystique had an enormous impact on the feminist movement and American society as a whole. By exposing the limitations and psychological toll of the feminine mystique, Friedan challenged the dominant narrative of the 1950s and 1960s, which idealized women's roles as wives and mothers. The book resonated with many women who felt trapped in traditional gender roles, and it became a catalyst for the second wave of feminism. Friedan's critique of the feminine mystique highlighted the need for structural changes in society, including greater access to education and employment for women, as well as social policies that support gender equality. The book's call for women's liberation contributed to the rise of the women's rights movement, which fought for legal and social reforms such as the right to work, reproductive rights, and the Equal Rights Amendment. In the decades since The Feminine Mystique was published, much progress has been made toward gender equality. Women now have greater access to education and the workforce, and many have made significant strides in breaking free from the constraints of traditional gender roles. However, the feminine mystique remains relevant today, as many of the issues Friedan raised, such as the balancing of work and family life, the representation of women in the media, and the challenges of achieving equality in the workplace, are still pressing concerns. Moreover, the book has had a lasting influence on feminist thought, inspiring subsequent generations of feminist scholars and activists to explore issues of gender, identity, and empowerment. The Feminine Mystique continues to be a foundational text in feminist theory, and remains an essential work for anyone interested in understanding the history of women's liberation. The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan is a landmark work that exposed the psychological and social consequences of the feminine mystique, a cultural ideal that confined women to narrow roles as wives and mothers. Friedan's analysis of the problem that has no name resonated with countless women and became a driving force behind the second wave of feminism. The book's call for women's education, participation in the workforce, and the right to define their own identities was revolutionary, and its legacy continues to shape feminist discourse and activism today. 7. Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Published in 1962, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson is a groundbreaking work of environmental science that helped launch the modern environmental movement and raise public awareness about the dangers of widespread pesticide use. The book focuses particularly on the environmental and health impacts of pesticides like DDT, dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, which were used extensively in agriculture and pest control during the mid-20th century. Carson's work is considered one of the most important pieces of environmental literature ever written, and it had a profound impact on policy, regulation, and public perceptions of human interaction with the natural world. In Silent Spring, Carson details the destructive effects of pesticides on wildlife, ecosystems, and human health. She paints a vivid and alarming picture of how chemicals, once introduced into the environment, have the potential to cause long-term harm to living organisms and disrupt the delicate balance of nature. Carson's main thesis is that these chemicals, though initially celebrated for their effectiveness in controlling pests, were causing irreversible damage to biodiversity, polluting the environment, and threatening the survival of species, including humans. Carson's compelling and accessible writing was instrumental in transforming the way people viewed the relationship between humans and the natural world. Rather than simply being a scientific treatise, Silent Spring was a passionate call for action and greater environmental responsibility. The book garnered widespread attention, igniting public debate about pesticide use, environmental conservation, and government regulation of toxic chemicals. Carson's work led to significant changes in policy, including the eventual ban of DDT in the United States in 1972, and it inspired the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in 1970. Silent Spring is often credited with raising the profile of environmental issues and helping to spark the global environmental movement that continues to address the challenges of climate change, pollution, and the degradation of natural resources. The widespread use of pesticides in agriculture and pest control began in the 1940s and 1950s, spurred by the development of synthetic chemicals during World War II. These chemicals, which included DDT, were initially hailed as scientific breakthroughs, offering an effective means of controlling pests that were destroying crops and spreading disease. The ability to kill insects and other pests with relatively little effort was seen as a triumph of modern chemistry and technology. However, Carson's research revealed that the widespread and indiscriminate use of these chemicals had unintended consequences. Rather than just affecting the pests they were designed to kill, pesticides were harming a wide range of non-target organisms, including beneficial insects like bees and butterflies, birds, and mammals. The effects of pesticides were not confined to the immediate areas of application. Chemicals would often spread through the air, water, and soil, affecting ecosystems far beyond the original target areas. Carson also critiques the scientific community for its complicity in promoting the use of harmful chemicals without fully understanding their long-term effects. Many scientists and industry leaders dismissed concerns about pesticides, focusing instead on the perceived benefits and downplaying the risks. Carson's book is a sharp critique of the unquestioning faith in technological progress, which often ignored the environmental and ethical implications of chemical use. In Silent Spring, Carson argues that the scientific community must take a more cautious and responsible approach to environmental issues. She calls for greater oversight of chemical companies and stricter regulations on the use of pesticides, emphasizing the need for scientific research that prioritizes the long-term health of ecosystems and human populations over short-term economic gains. At the heart of Silent Spring is Carson's detailed examination of the pesticide DDT, which had been widely used in agriculture, forestry, and public health programs to control mosquitoes and other pests. DDT was initially seen as a wonder chemical, capable of wiping out insects that carry diseases like malaria and typhus. It was also used to control pests that threatened crops, making it an essential tool for farmers. However, Carson's research revealed that DDT was far more dangerous than originally thought. She explains how DDT and other pesticides can persist in the environment for years, accumulating in the food chain through a process called biomagnification. When small organisms, such as insects or plants, absorbed the pesticide, it would then be consumed by larger animals, which would absorb the chemicals into their bodies. As these chemicals moved up the food chain, they became more concentrated, leading to severe ecological damage. One of the most alarming effects of DDT was its impact on bird populations. Carson highlights how DDT caused the thinning of eggshells in birds, which made them more vulnerable to breaking during incubation. As a result, many bird species, including eagles, hawks, and pelicans, saw their populations decline drastically. Carson describes how entire ecosystems were being disrupted, as the death of these birds led to imbalances in the food chain, affecting other species that relied on them for pest control or as prey. Carson also discusses the human health risks associated with pesticides, noting that chemicals like DDT were entering the human food supply and could potentially cause cancer, genetic mutations, and other health issues. She emphasizes the fact that the long-term health effects of these chemicals were largely unknown and that, in many cases, scientists and government agencies had ignored or dismissed evidence of harm. The book calls for a reevaluation of the widespread use of pesticides and a shift toward more sustainable and environmentally friendly methods of pest control. Carson advocates for integrated pest management, which relies on natural predators, crop rotation, and other environmentally safe techniques to control pests without relying on toxic chemicals. Carson's writing in Silent Spring is not just a scientific analysis, it is also a moral and ethical call to action. She appeals to readers' sense of responsibility, urging them to recognize the interdependence of all living things and the importance of preserving the natural world for future generations. Carson writes passionately about the need to protect not just the environment, but also human health and the well-being of all species. At the core of Carson's argument is the idea that humans are not separate from nature but are an integral part of it. She challenges the notion of human domination over nature, emphasizing that humans have a responsibility to act as stewards of the earth and to respect the balance of natural systems. Carson's view of nature is one of interconnectedness, where the destruction of one part of the ecosystem can have far-reaching consequences for all living things. By exposing the dangers of pesticides and other chemicals, Carson urges society to adopt a more holistic view of progress, one that takes into account the long-term impact of human activities on the environment. Her critique of the over-reliance on chemical solutions to problems calls for a re-evaluation of the way humans interact with the natural world, advocating for sustainable practices that ensure the health and vitality of ecosystems for generations to come. Silent Spring had a profound impact on the public consciousness and sparked widespread debate about the dangers of pesticides and the need for environmental regulation. While the book received strong praise from environmentalists, scientists, and the general public, it also faced fierce opposition from the chemical industry. Chemical companies, including giants like Monsanto, tried to discredit Carson's work, attacking her credibility and accusing her of fear-mongering. Despite this opposition, Silent Spring succeeded in raising awareness about the environmental and health risks associated with pesticides. The book generated public pressure on government agencies, leading to increased scrutiny of pesticide use and eventually resulting in policy changes. In 1972, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, banned DDT for agricultural use, citing the environmental damage it caused. This marked a significant victory for the environmental movement and demonstrated the power of public advocacy and scientific inquiry. Carson's work also helped lay the groundwork for the creation of the EPA in 1970. The agency was established to address growing concerns about pollution, chemical contamination, and other environmental issues. Carson's advocacy for environmental regulation and her emphasis on the precautionary principle, the idea that we should avoid actions that could cause irreversible harm to the environment, shaped the policies and ethos of the EPA in its early years. Silent Spring remains one of the most important and influential environmental books ever published, and its legacy continues to shape environmental discourse today. The book is credited with helping to catalyze the modern environmental movement, leading to the establishment of laws and agencies that protect the environment, such as the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. The book's warnings about the dangers of unchecked technological advancement and environmental degradation are still relevant in the face of current global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Carson's emphasis on the need for sustainable practices and respect for the environment continues to inform contemporary environmental movements, which advocate for policies that prioritize ecological health and human well-being over economic growth and industrial expansion. Additionally, Silent Spring has inspired generations of environmental scientists, activists, and policymakers. Carson's careful research, her ethical stance on environmental stewardship, and her ability to communicate complex scientific ideas in an accessible and compelling way continue to be a model for environmental writing and advocacy. Silent Spring by Rachel Carson is a landmark work of environmental literature that exposed the dangers of pesticides and chemical pollution to human health and the natural world. The book played a pivotal role in raising awareness about the environmental crisis and sparked widespread changes in public policy, including the eventual ban on DDT and the creation of the EPA. Carson's impassioned call for environmental responsibility and her critique of the human disregard for nature remain as relevant today as they were in the 1960s. Silent Spring is a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness of all life on Earth and the need for sustainable practices that protect our planet for future generations. 8. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. The Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and first published in 1848, is one of the most influential political documents in history. The manifesto presents a radical analysis of capitalist society and calls for a revolutionary transformation of social and economic systems. Marx and Engels argue that capitalism is inherently exploitative, dividing society into two primary classes: the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and the proletariat, the working class. The manifesto outlines the theory of historical materialism, which posits that the course of history is determined by material conditions and the way in which society organizes its production. Marx and Engels assert that the existing capitalist order is unsustainable and that the working class must rise up to overthrow the bourgeoisie, leading to the establishment of a classless society. The Communist Manifesto is divided into 4 sections. The first introduces the theory of class struggle, the second outlines the goals of the communist movement, the third addresses the criticisms and objections to communism, and the fourth calls for immediate action in the form of revolution. While short in length, the manifesto is powerful in its critique of the capitalist system and its call for the empowerment of the working class. The Communist Manifesto was written at a time of political upheaval in Europe, with revolutions and uprisings shaking the foundations of established monarchies and feudal systems. Marx and Engels saw these revolutionary moments as opportunities for the working class to seize power and reshape society. The manifesto was not only a political tract but also a call to action, inspiring workers, intellectuals, and activists to organize and fight for their rights. Over the years, the Communist Manifesto has been widely studied, debated, and adopted as a guiding text by socialist and communist movements around the world. Its ideas have played a central role in the development of Marxist theory and have influenced the political landscape of the 19th and 20th centuries, including the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the rise of communist regimes in China, Cuba, and other countries. One of the central ideas of the Communist Manifesto is the theory of historical materialism, which posits that human history is driven by the material conditions of society, specifically the way in which societies organize production. According to Marx and Engels, every society throughout history has been organized around the means of production, whether it be feudalism, capitalism, or communism. The way in which goods are produced and distributed forms the economic foundation of society and determines the social relations between individuals and classes. Marx and Engels argue that all historical development is driven by class struggle. In every society, there are different classes with competing interests, and history is the story of these classes fighting for power. Under feudalism, for example, the conflict was between the nobility and the serfs, while under capitalism, it is between the bourgeoisie, capitalist class, and the proletariat, working class. In a capitalist society, the bourgeoisie owns the means of production, factories, land, and resources, while the proletariat must sell its labor in exchange for wages. The bourgeoisie profits from the exploitation of the proletariat, who receive less value in wages than the value they create through their labor. Marx and Engels argue that capitalism, by its nature, leads to increasing inequality, as the bourgeoisie continues to accumulate wealth while the proletariat becomes more impoverished. This inherent contradiction, they contend, will eventually lead to the collapse of capitalism and the rise of a proletarian revolution. The working class, having nothing to lose but their chains, will rise up against the bourgeoisie, overthrowing the capitalist system and establishing a classless society. In the second section of the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels outline the goals of the communist movement. At the core of communism is the abolition of private property. Marx and Engels argue that private property, particularly the means of production, is the foundation of capitalist exploitation. By abolishing private property, they believe that the working class can take control of the means of production, ensuring that wealth is distributed more equitably among the population. Communism, as Marx and Engels envision it, is a classless society in which all people have equal access to the resources necessary for survival and development. There would be no division between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and no one would own land, factories, or other forms of capital. Instead, the means of production would be collectively owned and controlled by the people, with the goal of meeting the needs of all members of society rather than generating profits for a few wealthy individuals. In addition to abolishing private property, the manifesto advocates for a number of other revolutionary measures, including the progressive taxation of wealth, the establishment of free education, and the implementation of social welfare programs to support the working class. Marx and Engels also call for the abolition of inheritance rights and the centralization of credit and transportation under state control. These measures, they argue, would lay the foundation for a socialist society that would eventually evolve into a communist one. Marx and Engels were not simply concerned with overthrowing the capitalist system, they also sought to transform the entire structure of society. By abolishing private property and instituting collective ownership of the means of production, communism would create a society in which individuals were free from economic oppression and could pursue their own development and happiness. This vision of a utopian society was deeply appealing to workers, intellectuals, and revolutionaries of the time, and it continues to inspire socialist and communist movements to this day. In the third section of the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels address several criticisms of communism that had been raised by opponents of their ideas. One of the most common objections was that communism would destroy individual freedom and lead to a totalitarian state. Marx and Engels counter this argument by asserting that true freedom can only be achieved when individuals are no longer bound by the constraints of class and private property. Under capitalism, they argue, people are not truly free because they are exploited by the capitalist class and have limited control over their own lives. In a communist society, individuals would have the freedom to fully develop their potential, free from the oppression of economic inequality. Another criticism was that communism would lead to the destruction of all social order and create chaos. Marx and Engels reject this argument, pointing out that the existing social order under capitalism is itself chaotic and unjust, with vast inequalities of wealth and power. The abolition of capitalism, they argue, would bring about a more rational and just social order, where the needs of the many are prioritized over the interests of the few. Marx and Engels also respond to the accusation that communism is impractical and utopian. They argue that the rise of the proletariat is an inevitable historical development, driven by the contradictions within capitalism. As the working class becomes more conscious of its exploitation and organized into a revolutionary force, it will eventually overthrow the bourgeoisie and establish a socialist society. In this sense, communism is not a dream or ideal but a historical necessity. In the final section of the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels call for immediate action, urging workers of the world to unite and overthrow the capitalist system. They argue that the revolutionary potential of the proletariat is already present, as the working class grows larger and more organized. The manifesto's famous rallying cry, "Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains," encapsulates the call for international solidarity among the working class. Marx and Engels emphasize that the revolution will not be a sudden event but the culmination of a long process of class struggle. They foresee a period of political upheaval during which the proletariat will seize control of the state and dismantle the capitalist system. This revolutionary process will eventually lead to the establishment of a dictatorship of the proletariat, in which the working class holds political power and works to eliminate the remnants of capitalist society. The ultimate goal of this revolution is the creation of a classless society in which the state itself will wither away. In this ideal communist society, there will be no need for a state apparatus to enforce class domination, as the means of production will be collectively owned and wealth will be distributed based on need rather than profit. The Communist Manifesto has had a profound impact on the world, shaping political thought and sparking revolutions in many countries. It inspired the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, which led to the establishment of the Soviet Union, as well as socialist movements in China, Cuba, and other countries. The manifesto also influenced a wide range of socialist, communist, and Marxist movements around the world, from labor movements to anti-colonial struggles. However, the implementation of Marxist ideas in practice has been contentious, with varying results. While some of the early 20th century revolutions were inspired by Marxist theory, the outcomes were often far from the idealized vision of a classless society. The Soviet Union and other socialist states became marked by authoritarian regimes, leading to criticisms of Marxism's practical application. Nonetheless, the Communist Manifesto remains a foundational text for understanding the dynamics of capitalism, class struggle, and revolutionary change. Its ideas about exploitation, alienation, and the concentration of wealth and power in capitalist societies continue to resonate with those critical of inequality and economic injustice. In the context of contemporary global capitalism, the Communist Manifesto is still relevant. Issues such as wealth inequality, corporate power, and the exploitation of workers continue to be central concerns for many social movements. The manifesto's call for the unity of workers and the need for systemic change continues to inspire activists who seek to challenge the status quo and create a more equitable and just world. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels is a landmark document that challenged the foundations of capitalist society and called for a revolutionary transformation of the social and economic order. The manifesto's powerful critique of capitalism, its vision of a classless society, and its call for proletarian revolution have influenced political movements, revolutions, and ideologies for over 170 years. While the practical implementation of Marxist ideas has been controversial, the manifesto remains an essential work for understanding the dynamics of class struggle, exploitation, and social change. 9. The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. The Origin of Species, published in 1859 by Charles Darwin, is one of the most revolutionary and influential scientific works in history. In this groundbreaking book, Darwin presents the theory of natural selection, proposing that species evolve over time through a process of gradual change driven by competition for resources, environmental pressures, and the survival of the fittest individuals. The theory challenged traditional views of creation and sparked a paradigm shift in the biological sciences, forever altering our understanding of the natural world. Before Darwin's work, the prevailing scientific view, rooted in religious doctrine and classical thinking, held that species were fixed and unchanging, created by a divine being. The idea of evolution, where species could change over time and share common ancestors, was not widely accepted. However, Darwin's extensive research and evidence-based approach, combined with his theory of natural selection, provided a compelling explanation for the diversity of life on Earth and its complex, interconnected patterns. In The Origin of Species, Darwin presents his observations of various species, focusing particularly on his findings from the Galapagos Islands during his voyage on HMS Beagle. He compares the similarities and differences between species on different islands, as well as the adaptations that allowed them to survive in their specific environments. Darwin also draws upon fossil records, geological formations, and domestic breeding experiments to support his theory. The central idea of the book is that species are not immutable. Rather, they evolve through a process of natural selection, where advantageous traits become more common in a population because individuals with those traits are more likely to survive and reproduce. Over generations, these small variations can lead to the formation of new species. Darwin's theory of natural selection has since become the cornerstone of evolutionary biology, and has had profound implications for fields ranging from genetics to psychology, anthropology, and even philosophy. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was developed over many years, with his most significant observations coming from his 5-year voyage aboard the HMS Beagle, 1831 to 1836. During this journey, Darwin visited various parts of the world, including South America, Australia, Africa, and the Galapagos Islands, making detailed notes on the species he encountered. His observations of the geographic distribution of species and the variations between species on different islands were key to the development of his evolutionary theory. One of the most famous examples Darwin noted was the finches of the Galapagos Islands. He observed that the finches on different islands had slightly different beak shapes, adapted to the specific food sources available on each island. For example, some species had large, thick beaks for cracking seeds, while others had slender beaks suited for picking insects. These variations in beak morphology were crucial pieces of evidence for Darwin's theory, as they suggested that the finches had evolved from a common ancestor to adapt to different ecological niches. Darwin also studied the giant tortoises of the Galapagos, noting that tortoises from different islands had distinct shell shapes, which appeared to be related to the types of vegetation available on each island. He inferred that these differences were the result of gradual adaptations to the different environments in which the tortoises lived. In addition to his field observations, Darwin collected extensive fossil evidence, including remains of extinct animals. He noted the similarities between fossils and living species in certain regions, which led him to propose that species could gradually change over time, and that extinction and the emergence of new species were part of the natural course of life on Earth. The core of the origin of species is Darwin's theory of natural selection, which provides an explanation for how evolution occurs. Darwin proposed that in any given population, individuals exhibit variation in traits such as size, shape, color, and behavior. Some of these variations are advantageous in a particular environment, giving certain individuals a better chance of surviving and reproducing. For example, individuals with darker fur might be better camouflaged in a forested environment, making them less likely to be preyed upon. Over time, the advantageous traits become more common in the population because the individuals who possess them are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to their offspring. This process, known as survival of the fittest, results in a gradual change in the characteristics of a population. The less advantageous traits become less common, as individuals with those traits are less likely to survive and reproduce. Darwin emphasized that natural selection is a slow, gradual process that occurs over many generations. The cumulative effect of small changes can lead to the development of new species. He also argued that the process of evolution is driven by environmental pressures, such as the availability of food, climate conditions, and competition with other species. As environments change over time, the organisms living within them must adapt to survive, leading to the emergence of new traits and eventually, new species. While Darwin's theory was revolutionary, it was not immediately accepted by the scientific community. The idea that species could change over time through natural processes was controversial, especially in the context of religious and cultural beliefs about creation. However, Darwin's evidence-based approach, combined with his ability to explain the complexity of life's diversity in a systematic and scientific manner, ultimately won over the scientific community. Darwin's theory of natural selection provided a framework for understanding how species vary, adapt to their environments, and eventually give rise to new species. He argued that variation within a population is a key driver of evolution. Without variation, there would be no way for individuals to adapt to changing environments or compete for resources. He also emphasized that adaptations, or traits that enhance survival and reproduction, arise gradually over time through the accumulation of small changes. These adaptations can take many forms, including changes in physical traits, such as beak size or coat color, as well as behavioral traits, such as migration patterns or mating rituals. Over time, these adaptations can lead to the development of distinct species, as populations of the same species become isolated from one another and diverge in response to different environmental conditions. Darwin's idea of speciation, how new species arise, was based on the concept of reproductive isolation. When populations of a species become geographically separated, for example, by a mountain range, river, or ocean, they may experience different environmental pressures. Over time, the populations may accumulate enough differences in their traits that they can no longer interbreed successfully. This reproductive isolation results in the formation of new species. Darwin's ideas about speciation were revolutionary because they suggested that the diversity of life on Earth was not the result of divine creation, but rather the outcome of natural processes that could be studied and understood scientifically. The idea that new species could arise from the gradual accumulation of small changes was a radical departure from the static, creationist view of life's origins. In The Origin of Species, Darwin presents a wealth of evidence to support his theory of evolution. One of the most compelling types of evidence he presents is the fossil record, which shows a pattern of gradual change in species over time. Fossils of extinct species often resemble living species in the same geographical regions, suggesting that species evolve and change gradually over long periods of time. Darwin also drew upon the evidence of geographical distribution, noting that similar species in different regions often share common ancestors. For example, species of marsupials in Australia are similar to placental mammals in other parts of the world, but they are adapted to their specific environments. This geographic distribution of species suggested to Darwin that species evolve in response to their environments, and that similar ecological niches can give rise to similar adaptations, even in unrelated groups of organisms. Another key line of evidence for Darwin's theory was the similarities between species, particularly in their embryonic development. Darwin pointed out that embryos of different species often resemble one another in their early stages, suggesting a common ancestry. He also noted the existence of vestigial structures, body parts that serve no apparent function in a species but that are remnants of features found in ancestral species. These structures, such as the pelvic bones in whales or the wings in flightless birds, provided further evidence for the gradual evolution of species over time. When The Origin of Species was published, it had an immediate and profound impact on both the scientific community and the broader public. The book challenged long-held beliefs about the origins of life and the nature of species, and it set the stage for a new era of scientific inquiry into biology, genetics, and evolution. Darwin's theory provided a unifying framework for understanding the diversity of life and offered a powerful explanation for how complex organisms could evolve from simpler ones over millions of years. The book's impact extended beyond the scientific world, sparking debates about religion, ethics, and the nature of humanity. Many religious leaders and scholars rejected Darwin's ideas, viewing them as a challenge to the biblical account of creation. However, over time, the evidence supporting the theory of evolution became overwhelming, and Darwin's ideas gained widespread acceptance in the scientific community. The Origin of Species also paved the way for the development of modern evolutionary theory, particularly the field of genetics. The discovery of DNA and the principles of inheritance in the 20th century provided further support for Darwin's theory, as scientists were able to study the genetic mechanisms underlying evolution and natural selection. The synthesis of Darwin's ideas with modern genetics led to the development of the modern evolutionary synthesis, which is the foundation of contemporary evolutionary biology. The Origin of Species remains one of the most influential works in the history of science. Darwin's theory of natural selection revolutionized biology and changed the way we understand life on Earth. It laid the groundwork for fields such as genetics, ecology, and anthropology, and it continues to inform research in these areas today. Darwin's ideas have also had a profound impact on other fields, including psychology, philosophy, and sociology. The concept of evolution has influenced our understanding of human behavior, social structures, and the development of cultures. The theory of natural selection has even been applied to fields such as economics and political science, where it has been used to analyze competition and social dynamics. In the 21st century, The Origin of Species continues to be a foundational text in biology. The theory of evolution by natural selection remains central to our understanding of how life on Earth has developed and adapted over time. The discovery of new fossils, the mapping of genomes, and advances in evolutionary genetics continue to support and expand upon Darwin's original ideas, making The Origin of Species as relevant today as it was when it was first published. The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin is one of the most important and transformative works in the history of science. Darwin's theory of natural selection provided a revolutionary explanation for how species evolve and adapt to their environments, challenging traditional views of creation and establishing the foundation for modern evolutionary biology. The book's impact has been profound, shaping not only the scientific community but also our broader understanding of life on Earth and our place in the natural world. Darwin's legacy continues to resonate in scientific research, education, and popular culture, and The Origin of Species remains a seminal work in the study of life's diversity and origins. 10. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. published in 1932, is a seminal dystopian novel that has left a lasting impact on literature, philosophy, and societal discourse. The book presents a future society where technological advancements and state control have eradicated individuality, emotion, and personal freedom. Huxley envisions a world where humans are genetically engineered and conditioned to fit into predetermined social roles, ensuring stability and uniformity but at the cost of personal autonomy and genuine human experiences. In Brave New World, society is stratified into castes, ranging from alphas to epsilons, each genetically designed to perform specific functions. The use of advanced reproductive technologies and psychological conditioning ensures that individuals are content with their roles, eliminating social conflicts and economic disparities. The novel explores themes of consumerism, the loss of individuality, and the ethical implications of technological control over human life. Huxley's portrayal of a seemingly utopian society raises profound questions about the balance between technological progress and human values. The citizens of this world are kept placid and obedient through a combination of genetic manipulation, sleep learning, hypnopedia, and the widespread use of a pleasure-inducing drug called soma. This control mechanism ensures that dissent and dissatisfaction are virtually non-existent, creating a facade of happiness and harmony. However, beneath the surface of this controlled society lies a deep sense of emptiness and lack of true fulfillment. The protagonist, Bernard Marx, begins to question the norms of his society, feeling alienated by the lack of genuine relationships and emotional depth. His journey highlights the inherent conflict between societal stability and individual freedom, as well as the human desire for meaning and connection beyond superficial pleasures. Brave New World serves as a cautionary tale about the potential dangers of unchecked technological advancement and the loss of humanity in the pursuit of progress. Huxley warns against a future where scientific achievements are used to manipulate and control rather than to enhance the human experience. The novel's exploration of these themes remains highly relevant today, as contemporary society grapples with issues related to genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and the ethical use of technology. The legacy of Brave New World is evident in its influence on both literature and popular culture. It has inspired countless works of dystopian fiction, serving as a touchstone for discussions about the role of technology in society and the importance of preserving human values in the face of modernization. The novel's enduring relevance is a testament to Huxley's keen insight into the potential consequences of societal and technological trends. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley is a powerful and thought-provoking work that challenges readers to consider the implications of a society driven by technological control and the suppression of individuality. Its exploration of themes such as consumerism, genetic engineering, and the quest for happiness continues to resonate, making it a vital addition to the list of books that have changed the world. Books have the power to shape the world, challenge our beliefs, and ignite revolutions, both in thought and action. From Charles Darwin's groundbreaking insights into evolution to Adam Smith's principles of economic freedom, these 10 transformative books have left an indelible mark on humanity's journey. Each work represents a milestone in our collective pursuit of knowledge, justice, and progress. They remind us of the enduring influence of ideas, the importance of questioning the status quo, and the role of literature in driving change. Whether they revolutionized science, redefined societal norms, or inspired new ways of thinking, these books stand as a testament to the profound impact of words. Which of these books resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into the stories that shaped our world.